Okay, I think it is time that we start the event. We've given it a couple of extra minutes. So just wanted to start off by welcoming everyone. Welcome to Jasco Consulting's official launch of our Microsoft Cloud Accelerator program offering. Hand-selected by Microsoft, Jasco is only one of 14 partners across Australia that were a part of this program. So we're incredibly proud and excited to present to you our Zero Trust offering called Limitless Security. To start off, I'm going to give you a brief introduction as to who's presenting today. We've got Michael Rogers from Jasco Consulting alongside Kenny Singh from Microsoft, who are starting off. And we'll be finishing up with a live demo from Danny Grasso from Jasco Consulting as well. But please do wait until the end. We will be having a live Q&A session where we'll be able to answer all of your questions. Michael, over to you.
Great, thank you, Helen. Hi and welcome everybody. I'm Michael, pre-sales engineer at Jasco. A little bit of background about myself. I've been with Jasco for about 4 years now. The last 12 to 18 months largely focused on cybersecurity. I've been in the IT world for about 16 years. Started as just a tech in the education department, found my specialty in network engineering, and for the 7 years prior to joining Jasco, I was a solutions architect for Telstra. So this is a bit of a change of pace, but quite happy to be hosting a Q&A with Microsoft's Kenny Singh. Kenny, welcome and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Look, once again, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and join you on this panel conversation. We are just super excited at Microsoft on what the Limitless offer can basically offer our customers. So thank you so much for having me on the call. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much. Kenny's Microsoft's product manager for cybersecurity and compliance. So we're actually really quite lucky to have him here. Obviously, Kenny, my team and I, we know who you are. We've seen you speak several times. You've even joined us for events like this before in the past, but not everyone in the audience will necessarily know who you are. Do you want to give a quick background about yourself, maybe professional history, something personal if you'd like?
I would absolutely love the opportunity to do that. So look, I've been at Microsoft for about 10 years in various roles. So I joined Microsoft in Microsoft Consulting Services. So I was a Office 365 and Azure architect for many years. I worked on quite a few different programs, including cloud transformation programs at Telstra and a number of other customers. During that period. So lots of hands-on experience, lots of work around moving on-premises workloads to Azure and Office 365. So in the latter parts of my Microsoft Consulting Services days, I specialized in cybersecurity and compliance. And then I moved across to the partner organization here in Microsoft Australia to work with our leading partners on cybersecurity and compliance, in fact. This is going back about 4.5, 5 years ago when the Microsoft cybersecurity and compliance story was rapidly evolving, but it wasn't where it actually is right now. So I've been with the story, kind of from the inception of it, about 4.5, 5 years ago, and in different forms before that as well. So worked in the partner organization for many years as a cybersecurity and compliance architect first, and then a cybersecurity and compliance lead. And then as of November last year, I moved across to what we call the BG, or the business group at Microsoft Australia. So now I lead the overall cybersecurity and compliance go-to-market strategy across the whole subsidiary. So in cybersecurity and compliance for many years, I have been in the cybersecurity and compliance industry and very well connected to the cybersecurity and compliance industry as well, to forums like ISA and OstCyber and a number of other forums as well. Something personal about me, my wife and I, we live in Melbourne here, very passionate about powerlifting. Deadlifting is my is my evil. I absolutely love deadlifting. I've been doing that for the last several years, and we have 2 little puppy dogs. One's called Milo, and the other is called Mia. They are quite little and lap dogs in the true sense of the word. And that's me, Michael.
Okay. I knew about the dogs. I didn't know about the deadlifting, so that's interesting. Now, moving into what we're here to talk about. Now, remote work is not a new concept. However, the last 12 months have really forced businesses to adopt new ways of working. My observation at the start of all this was this rush to remote attitude was really focused on making businesses stay operational. Security really seemed to be pretty low on the priority list. Now, that attitude definitely seems to be changing now. Can you share your observations of what changes you've seen to the Australian landscape over the last 12 to 18 months?
Sure. So look, we've actually seen a very rapid escalation in cyber attacks, and that's both from opportunistic criminals and nation-state actors. You would have probably heard a few nation-state actor names, in the last kind of 3 to 4 months, right? So it's very, very recent. We've been seeing that consistent theme throughout 2020 as well. The latest one is Hafnium. So that's the nation-state actor that's exploiting certain zero-day vulnerabilities in Exchange, which we now have updates for. Yeah. So we've actually seen a very significant proliferation, escalation in frequency, sophistication of cyber attacks, and that kind of came at the same time as we were all in the throes of the pandemic. We've also seen a very rapidly expanding digital estates. This whole concept of remote work became really, really real during the COVID period because people had to improvise. They actually had to work from anywhere and everywhere. We were all working from home, wherever we could work from, whether that was a car in the garage or wherever we actually worked from. So remote work became front of mind in the true sense of the word. And then the third very key thing we've actually seen is significant pressure on organizations to cut costs. And so we've actually seen quite a significant disruption in the Australian economy over the last 12 months or so. We actually had our first recession, I think it was in probably 20 years or something like that last year. So we've seen very significant pressures to cut cost. Yeah. So those are kind of the three central themes we've actually seen, we've heard from our customers and partners throughout 2020 and now.
Okay, sure. What would be sort of the top cybersecurity incidents that you've seen as well?
Sure. So look, I just wanted to put the escalation in cyber threats into context. So the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, that's the central body in Australia that basically gets the cybersecurity incident reports and cybercrime reports and so on and so forth. So just a few statistics for the audience here. So they had around 2,266 cybersecurity incidents, that's unique cybersecurity incidents reported to them. Between June 2019 and July 2020. We've seen data breaches in 2020 alone. And just to put this into perspective, the average cost of a data breach in Australia is $3.35 million. That's the average cost of a data breach. So we've actually seen a very significant escalation in cyber threats. If we actually look at the specific types of cyber threats, then number one, the crown sport is phishing campaigns. I'm sure all of us have actually seen phishing campaigns in one form or the other. So they're very prolific, especially because of COVID-19. The opportunistic hackers and attackers, they leveraged phishing campaigns quite extensively to phish credentials and steal money and do all of that not so wonderful stuff. So that's number one. The second is web exploits. So that's all around web shells, putting malicious code, attacking through the internet. So putting malicious code on web servers and so on and so forth. So that's all around web exploits. Then the third theme or the third layer of attack, which is becoming more and more pronounced, and actually became very pronounced with SolarWinds, the SolarWinds attack that actually happened a few months ago, is supply chain attack. So how do we actually defend against someone actually bugging a software that we trust? So for example, in the case of the SolarWinds attack, it was actually a SolarWinds Orion network management software. Now that's a very widely trusted software across the globe. And essentially the way that attack was perpetrated was by sneaking malicious code in that software. And then because customers implicitly trusted that software, that basically ended up compromising their environments. Now that can actually happen with any software in the supply chain, right? So those are kind of the three themes or the three attack types we've actually seen. So just to reiterate, phishing campaigns, web exploits, and third-party services, which is essentially supply chain attacks.
Okay, perfect. Oh, thank you. Are there any, I suppose, key challenges that you're seeing businesses facing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, when we started, I think this is going back to around February or March last year. The most significant challenge respond to the needs of remote work. So, for example, remote access gateways and so on and so forth. How do we actually have these tools, these technologies in a scaled manner that actually supports the significant escalation in demand for remote services? Because if you see, typically organizations were designed for, let's say, about 20 or 25% at the higher side of people working remotely. And the remote access gateways, VPN software, all of that kind of stuff was basically scaled for that. Right. So that was the number one challenge we actually had. So that was during what we call the response phase. The second phase is the recover phase. So once customers and once organizations scaled out their VPN infrastructure to cope with this increased demand, how do we actually then put security components and solutions in place that basically meet the demands of the organization over the next 6 to 12 months? And then the third phase we call the Reimagine phase. So how do we now plan for a world that's actually going to be essentially hybrid from the sounds of it and from the appearance of it, right? How do we manage insider risk? How do we manage cyber risk? How do we manage all of these things when you actually have such an expanded digital estate that spans corporate managed devices, personal devices, mobile devices, data on premises and data in the cloud? So how do you actually manage such a hybrid digital estate and such a hybrid workforce? So that's where we're actually seeing questions asked about what is that reimagine cybersecurity strategy, and that's where this whole principle or concept of zero trust comes in. And that's why personally I've actually been really excited about the Limitless offer that you have, Michael.
Great. All right, thank you very much. You've done a good segue there, because my next question is really around that reimagining security. I know from our perspective, well, the best innovations and ideas generally come out of necessity. We always try to be, leading edge with our technologies, but we definitely find that we're often impressed with how our customers innovate. Learning from our customers helps us stay ahead of our competition, and we assume Microsoft have some pretty similar views in that regard. How do you see Microsoft's customers innovating and reimagining security to address today's challenges?
Absolutely. And just going back to what I was alluding to before about zero trust, right? So the whole concept or the whole paradigm of zero trust has become quite prolific over the last 12 months or so. So it's actually gotten a lot of screen time, across the blogosphere, across the cybersphere, in all kinds of different conversations about digital transformation and cybersecurity. And the reason for that is that if you actually have a very changed set of variables and very changed set of factors, you actually have to design a strategy that deals with this change, that deals with this hybrid environment. Let me just put that into context. So typically, the way we used to manage security was in, if I may describe it like this, a castle model. So the castle was basically the corporate network. If you were in the castle or in the castle, you were implicitly trusted. So a device in the castle on the corporate network, as long as you could authenticate, and authentication was, on a typical network through Kerberos, you had single sign-on on-premises applications and so on and so forth. If you were on the network, you were implicitly trusted. The challenge is, if you actually look at the world that we live in right now, you have people working from anywhere. They're not necessarily using corporate devices. They want access to data from their mobile devices. So that old paradigm is not going to work anymore. So you can't implicitly trust an access attempt because of a specific variable. Zero trust, it actually has three fundamental principles. The first is always assuming breach. So what that basically means, simplistically put, is that we never let an access attempt through. We always assume breach. We're always assuming that when someone tries to access data, that access attempt might potentially be malicious. So we actually need that actor, that user, to present additional forms of information that actually helps us build that confidence to give them access to data. Privileged access management, or least privilege, what that basically means is that the actor or the user accessing the data in that specific context of authentication only has access to what they absolutely need access to. So we're actually managing the privileges on that account very, very carefully. And then the third principle or pillar of zero trust is explicitly verify. So, this is going back to what I was actually saying earlier. We used to implicitly assume that because someone is in the castle on the corporate network, that access attempt was inherently safe. That assumption is no longer true. So explicit verification basically means that we look at different signals. So for example, is the identity secure? So the user account, the username, password, the multi-factor authentication, and so on and so forth. Is the device secure? Is the device compliant? Does it actually have any malware on it? Is the location where the user is accessing the content from, the data from, is that trusted? Do we have behavioral analytics based information on the user? So, for example, we have behavioral models in Microsoft 365 and Azure, where we can actually see what does the user typically do. Is the user doing something that actually violates those behavioral models? So we take all of those things into consideration, and that's the whole explicit verification pillar. And that's why, Michael, we actually say that zero trust is a very fundamental paradigm shift to reimagining cybersecurity, because zero trust, in fact, is adapted for such a hybrid world where you actually have users, accessing information from anywhere and might live anywhere as well. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's beautiful. And I like that you mentioned behavioral analytics as well. You're perfectly leading into my next question, so it's working out really well. Now, behavioral analytics, machine learning, AI, they're really terms that get thrown around quite a bit. My observation is that not everyone necessarily really understands what they are. Now, I stumbled across a LinkedIn article which you wrote, where you shared a personal story about your family. What I liked about it expressed a very tangible outcome and benefit from machine learning. Do you mind, if you can remember the story I'm talking about, do you mind sharing that story for the audience?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I'm actually going to forget that story anytime soon because it's so personal, Michael. So I think this is going back a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right. I got a call from my mom, a very distressed call, basically saying, I can't get a hold of your dad. And my dad is a doctor. He used to work in country New South Wales as a GP. And I tried his mobile phone and it actually went straight to his voicemail. Now, I actually do manage. I'm my dad's personal assistant as well, so I manage a lot of the electronic communications and his subscriptions and so on and so forth. He's gotten progressively tech savvy, but I think he would actually confess as well that he's not as tech savvy as he would actually like to be, right? So I do a lot. So I'm basically his digital assistant in a certain way as well. So I quickly fired up the app of his mobile company, being a security person, and I actually saw that his mobile number had actually disappeared from the app completely. So that instantaneously rose red flags in my head, basically saying, right, how is this possible that this mobile number is not on that specific provider's app any longer? It's almost as if he doesn't have that mobile number any longer. So then we called Dad over a voice over IP connection, and he did answer. Because obviously voice over IP connections will work, right? Even if the mobile number doesn't work, if he's connected to a Wi-Fi, we can call him. So we were able to get a hold of him. And he basically said, look, I just don't have any signal on my mobile phone at all. So I immediately got him to call his bank. Right. And as it actually turns out, so this whole process basically took, I think, about an hour or so from the time that his mobile phone got disconnected to when he actually called the bank. And the bank basically said to my dad that they've been trying to contact him for the last hour, because there have been a few suspicious transactions on his account that they've subsequently managed to block. So let me just unwrap this whole story for you a little. So this is a perfect example of defense in depth and zero trust, right? And the reason I actually say that is because the first level was basically identity verification, right? So someone phished him for his credentials. That's what we're actually expecting. So they had his username and password to his internet banking. Second, they SIM-jacked him. So they actually stole his mobile number. In fact, as it actually turns out, when I look deeper into it, it's really not very difficult to steal people's mobile numbers, right? And I think that's something that probably needs to be looked at a little further. So it's a great idea to always have a password with your telecommunications provider, because it's quite simple. As long as someone first name, last name, date of birth, and a couple of other details about you, and your mobile number, it becomes quite easy for them to basically pretend to be you and get your number ported somewhere else. So they basically had dad's mobile number. So what that basically means is that when they logged on to that internet banking site and the second factor of authentication happened, they would have actually received the alert, because now they have the mobile number. So they would have received that text. The third level of defense, or the third layer of defense, when they tried to transfer a large sum of money from his account to another account, which was not an account in that bank, the bank's behavioral analytics processes kicked in and basically said, right, we've not seen this user transfer this kind of money, this sum of money to another account. So we actually think this is suspicious. And this is a perfect example of zero trust, right? Because what you're actually saying is, you're saying, even if someone has the username and password, even if someone passes multi-factor authentication, when they attempt to access sensitive data or do something that's highly privileged, that's very sensitive, we're actually going to look at the behavioral models to see whether that activity coincides with what that user typically does. And if it does not, we're actually going to stop it. And let the user get back to us and basically say that, look, you stopped my activity. So our AI and machine learning models will learn from that. And next time the user will not be stopped on that specific activity, because now that activity is a part of their behavioral model.
Perfect. So it sounds very much to me, what I'm building in my head as you tell that story is the layer approach. So we've got your username, your password, next layer being that extra point of authentication. And even if that were to be breached, although multi-factor authentication, I know this stat, reduces your chance of having your account compromised by 99.9%, which I don't remember a lot of stats, so I'm glad I remembered that one. We've then got the behavioral analytics as the next layer of security. So thank you very much for your time, Kenny, and thank you for that story. I love that one. So it's always great to get your views and your insights on the world of security. So thank you.
It's a pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Right. Now, we will be answering questions a little later, so please put any questions into the chat. I believe Kenny will be staying around to the end as well, so it's a great opportunity to get his views on specific challenges that might be affecting you. Give me one quick second to just move on to the next. Great. So over the next 15 minutes, we're going to jump a little deeper into modern security, the current threat landscape, and explore the approach that is zero trust. We'll also dive into some of Microsoft's solution portfolio for security and compliance, and we will talk briefly about Jasco's approach to security and how we can apply our security expertise to help you. After this, you'll also be shown a live demo of some of Microsoft's security solutions by our cloud and systems management lead, Danny Grasso. So why is security relevant to your business? A third of Australian businesses have experienced cybercrime with an average cost of over $270,000 and 23 days to recover. Now, Kenny gave me a much higher figure just then, so I think my facts might be out of date, but I'll move anyway. That figure of 23 days increases to 51 days when facilitated by a malicious insider. PricewaterhouseCoopers have just released their annual CEO survey, which showed cyber threats rank as a #1 perceived risk ahead of pandemics and other health crises. However, many small and medium businesses still believe that they are too small to be targeted. Statistics show that 60% of all targeted attacks are directed at this segment. Statistics also show that Australia is an attractive target for cyber criminals because of our relative wealth and high levels of online content. So what is zero trust? Now, Kenny covered this quite well, but I'll go over it again. Zero trust is really built on these three principles, being verify explicitly, which focuses on always making sure the user is who they say they are, regardless of what system they're accessing. Least privileged access is about ensuring that no user has greater privileges than they require. This protects against malicious insiders and accidental incidents such as mass deletion of company data. It also ensures that if an account is compromised, it will be limited in its ability to impact the business. The third principle focuses on activity tracking and behavioural analytics. What has happened? How did it happen? Who or what did it? These principles are then applied to each of the 6 components on the right. You're also encouraged to think outside the box as well. So if you've got other components within your environment, you can consider adding the principles to those as well. So why is identity important? If you take nothing away from today's session, at a minimum, please consider applying the Zero Trust principles to your identities. The reason for that, 81% of breaches are caused by credential theft. And in a cloud-first world, identity is the entry point to a company's data, resources, devices, applications, systems, the whole lot. Staff are no longer accessing resources from inside the office, or in Kenny's analogy, the castle. This means they are no longer secured by firewalls, and management and configuration platforms can no longer reach the devices. The introduction of BYOD has meant less visibility and management of devices, and companies are now struggling with how to enforce compliance and ensure that remote devices do not increase the company's attack surface. Shadow IT exists in almost every business. Cloud and third-party applications are deployed into a business environment without the knowledge of IT or the implementation of any governance. Each application has its own vulnerabilities, whether they are desktop apps, server systems, SaaS apps. These are always being addressed with patches and updates. However, attackers are always looking for the next zero-day exploit. Some applications create avenues for data leakage, which can result in intellectual property loss, negative branding and press, and regulatory non-compliance. A business does not operate without data. Whether the data is patient information, client financial details, student information, or your own company's intellectual property. The impact of this data being leaked externally can be significant. Negative press and brand damage, competitors getting the upper hand on your business's strategies, non-compliance, and quite often large fines. Now, when people think of security, their focus is usually about securing the borders, the castle. This is somewhat of a limited view of security, however, is still very relevant. The main external threats that are seen today are via malicious email and websites. These include phishing emails, which are broadcast emails attempting to gather information such as credentials, bank account details, spear phishing emails, which are phishing emails, but generally directed at individuals of influence, such as a global administrator or a chief financial officer. Spoofing, where the sender will manipulate the email header to impersonate a trusted sender, and malicious websites. Often linked with phishing emails, these websites mimic legitimate websites to steal personal information. While external threats are real and deserve attention, internal threats are often overlooked. Now, if we think back to the start of my presentation, I mentioned that cybercrime initiated externally takes 23 days to recover from. However, when performed by a malicious insider, this extends to 51 days. What this tells me is that we need to shift our focus. When a disgruntled employee can perform a mass deletion of data or exfiltrate customer data and corporate intellectual property, this poses a significant risk to the business. Often a lack of internal monitoring can also make these compromises harder to track than external ones. So what is Microsoft doing to address these threats? Now, don't go reading this whole page. It breaks all the rules of hosting a PowerPoint slide. But what I want you to get from this is an understanding of how seriously Microsoft is taking security and how interwoven each of their solutions is with each other. If you're interested in looking at this later, it is publicly available. Now, I mentioned earlier, identity is very important. The identity is king, sticking with the castle model. Identity platform, and it is used to access all of Microsoft's cloud services. However, can also be used to extend its security benefits to on-premises services, third-party applications, and is the core of Microsoft's Zero Trust strategy. It provides single sign-on to simplify the user's experience, secure business-to-business capabilities, and reduces administrative overhead with user self-service facilities. Passwords are a 60-year-old technology that do not meet today's security requirements. Staff use the same passwords for work resources as they do for personal services like Facebook and Hotmail. In some cases, they even sign up to public services using their work email addresses. A compromise of personal non-related applications will often result in the compromise of company resources. This is almost impossible for a company to manage with business policies alone. MFA is the new first line of defense and is the baseline of modern external access security. MFA protects access to resources using three key principles, that being something you know, typically a password or a PIN, something you have, such as a trusted device that is not easily duplicated, like a phone or a hardware key, and something you are, which these days tends to be biometrics, like a fingerprint or a face scan. I find that I often receive some hesitance when discussing MFA with our customers. They have the impression that users will be prompted and challenged all the time, which is simply not the case. This is addressed with conditional access, which controls when the user is prompted. Common scenarios include a login from a previously unseen device, login from an unknown location, such as overseas, or if a user's profile is modified. An example being a recent password reset. In addition to simplifying the logon experience, conditional access will verify access to resources and enforce policies depending on conditions such as user location, device type, its level of management, its patch statuses, and variables associated with the applications themselves. So far, we've covered Microsoft's key strategies for managing and securing identities. Endpoint Manager is Microsoft's primary solution aimed at managing and securing devices. Previously known as Intune, Endpoint Manager is mostly known for its mobile device and mobile application management. What is important to note here is that Endpoint Manager is actually manages not only iOS and Android devices, but also Windows 10 and Apple Mac workstations too. Because Endpoint Manager is a cloud service, it does not have the imposed borders of traditional systems such as group policies, System Center, or WSUS. In fact, you can actually use Endpoint Manager to supplement System Center so that it can extend its management reach outside of the traditional borders. Because email threats are recognized as some of the most effective types of attacks, Microsoft has included Exchange Online protection as standard. The emails are checked for sender IP and domain reputation, scanned for malware, and assessed for spam or spoofing before it arrives in your inbox. If the email is found to have a negative reputation, any contents will then be executed in a container or sandbox and monitored for zero-day attack behaviors. Microsoft has also introduced zero-hour auto purge, which will retroactively remove delivered threats from the user's mailbox if a previously unseen email threat were to get through. Microsoft Defender for Office 365 builds upon the strong foundation of Exchange Online protection by introducing some key differences. MDO will sandbox all email attachments to test for zero-day attacks. It introduces safe links, which will scan any website linked in an email to mitigate phishing events before any harm can be done. It will extend these protections into Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive to reduce the attack surface. This will include malware scanning and content filtering within these systems. MDO also provides IT and security officers with assessment tools to assess staff readiness, such as attack simulators for phishing and brute force password attacks. Microsoft Defender for Identity helps identify vulnerabilities and identities and provides recommendations for resolving them. It performs identity security assessments so you know exactly where your vulnerabilities are. For example, it will identify applications that may be authenticating using clear text password. MDI leverages data intelligence to prioritize and reveal threats. These are based on common vulnerabilities and exploits and is supplemented by AI and analytics to identify uncommon behaviours. Now, do not confuse this one with Microsoft Antivirus. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is a cloud-based analytic platform. Where Microsoft Defender for Identity focused on behaviour of an identity, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint compares device behaviour against known and unknown malicious behaviours, common vulnerabilities and exploits, and data from telemetry sensors built into Windows. This data is then fed into threat analytics to provide administrators with clear reports detailing timeline, exposure rating, affected systems, and remediation actions. Data analytics means that the entire organisation will be able to learn from and protect against isolated incidents before they are able to spread. Cloud App Security is one of my favourites. It provides admin with the visibility of applications used within the business, whether they are deployed by IT or not. You'll be able to assess the usage of unsanctioned apps and rate each app for security risk and compliance. Using this information, you can then make an educated decision whether to build policies for the usage of those apps or to block them entirely. For those of you who are looking to build your own SOC, I do suggest you have a look at Sentinel. The simplest deployment feeds information from all the Microsoft security offerings that I've mentioned previously and can ingest data from hardware appliances, Windows servers, and third-party applications. It will then correlate this data and link events from each system into one incident or ticket. This can then be used for much simpler investigation. Sentinel also includes security orchestration and response, or SOAR, which helps to better manage the incidents and automate repetitive tasks. So we're now going to jump into Jasco's offerings. We've already covered sort of the modern threat landscape. We've defined zero trust. So now we'll jump in. Although we've covered many things here, this is not everything that Microsoft has to offer regarding security. The landscape is large and each security solution has its own specific place. We recognise that implementing all these components is rarely the correct approach. As such, we have created our offerings based on our years of experience and targeted them at the most common use cases. That being said, we do believe consultancy will always be the best approach. We want to know about your business. What are your challenges? And we want to tailor security to meet your objectives. Jasco recognises that the last 12 months have not left every business with a very healthy budget. You heard Kenny mention that budget is quite a concern for a lot of businesses at the moment. The Essentials offering here has been developed for those businesses who are conscious of costs, and it primarily focuses on external risks. Essentials will protect against threats such as account or device compromise, malware, and email threats. Device management and log analytics will provide centralized reporting, alerting, and policy compliance. The result of these solutions is that it will make your business unattractive to bad actors because their investment will outweigh their return. Our enhanced offering is proposed for those who require the next level of security. It builds upon our Essentials offering by introducing machine learning and data analytics to identify, track, lock down, and automate the remediation of security events within your organisation, whether that be across external communications, identities, devices, or applications. This offering heavily leverages the Microsoft Defender for Office 365 identity and endpoint solutions to build a holistic view of behaviours and threats from both external and internal parties. Thank you for listening. We're not quite done yet. Up next, we have Danny Grasso, who's got the scariest part of the event, and that is a live presentation. So let's cross our fingers for him. If any of you like what you've heard so far, please stick around. You know, a live demo is always the best way to see these things. After that, we're going to jump into some question and answer time. So please put your questions in the chat. We'll be addressing them soon. Danny, over to you.
All right, unmute. Thank you, Mike. I think my time's being cut. I think we've got 10 minutes to get through this, so I'm going to move fairly quickly. And today I wanted to show you really just a quick snapshot of what the security offering is about. This isn't the complete solution by any means. It's a glimpse at some of the core components, and to give you an idea in this demo environment that I've got up and running. As to what we cover, and we talk about 6 pillars, and I'm going to start with identity because we've talked a lot about identity, and identity being in some ways or in a lot of ways the heart of security. So we need to know when identities are at risk, and some of the things that might be impacting our users. And what we're looking at on screen here is part of our identity protection, and identifying certain things that are happening to our users that might be identified as at risk or not at risk. And things like in this example, we're seeing anonymous IP address access and password spray attacks that might be contributing to us either identifying that this is normal behavior. We might have seen as a part of password spray, a number of incorrect passwords followed by a successful password change, but that happened over an anonymous IP address, which might indicate that we want to investigate that a little bit further. And if we do want to investigate that a little bit further, we can go ahead and look at that particular user. This is probably not a great example because this happened a bit of time ago, and that attack or a simulated attack was remediated. Sorry, let me just go back to that again. Just had a browser refresh. So if I click on Alan de Young here and look at the user page, we'll see that at the moment, Alan has a priority investigation score of 0. So the system is telling us we don't think that we need to investigate Alan, but there are some other alerts that we can look at. We can view all of the user alerts related to Alan. We can look at related activity to see the types of things that have happened that might warrant, from our perspective, some additional investigation. So we can see specifically here on this second page that here are the events that it picked up on, which were from an unknown location, in that case in Germany. So we can get fairly deep there as to looking at what's happening with our identities, which is very important. Moving on to device management, we've talked a little bit about device management there in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And the importance of device management, we've talked a little bit about this already, but from keeping our devices updated, patching them, and also using information from devices to look at compliance. And one of the things I wanted to quickly show you, we'll look at this in a demo in about 2 minutes on a machine. I want to point out here that I've got 2 Windows 10 computers. One is Win 10 in Australia and the other one's in the US. The US machine is not compliant. So I want you to try and remember that. We're going to come back to that in just a second. And also that we've talked about not just the Windows platform, but also other platforms, iOS, Mac OS, and Android, that we can manage and look at that compliance state and that security risk state. Endpoint security is also an important part of managing devices, and particularly knowing when devices are compromised, how healthy our devices look. Is there any malware, active malware that we need to look at, both from an alerting point of view or from a reporting point of view? Are there any unhealthy endpoints that we need to look at and address, things to resolve to improve our endpoint security, regardless of where those devices are? And moving on now to something we talked about in Office 365 protection. And there's nothing really exciting about looking at what malware might have been found or what phishing attempts. So I want to actually show you something a little bit different, and Mike talked a little bit about this in the presentation, is the attack simulation training. So this is an important aspect of security, particularly when phishing is one of the most prevalent types of attacks. And if you've seen the Microsoft Cybersecurity Defense Report, also the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's recent report, phishing is there as one of the most prolific types of attacks that's taking place. So what we're able to do here is to simulate attacks on an organization to help educate people. And the whole purpose is education to reduce the risk of phishing attempts being successful in your environment, to educate people of that. And you can see there's a couple of technique templates that we can use to to help to educate people and then provide training to them. And I'll give you an example here. We're just going to jump across to Australia first, not the US. And we can tell it's Australia because it's daytime and there's a map of Australia. So we're going to launch Outlook for a user here, Adele. Adele's logging in and she's received an email here that says, we've received a secure document via Teams. Once that page loads, let me just refresh it. There we go. So we've got a secure document via Teams that I want to open, and there's a link here that says open in Teams for more details. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And this is an example of that attack simulation email. So Adele's going to sign in, username and password, and we're going to get an indication that says, Adele, you were just phished. But the whole purpose of this is that we're going to learn from this. And it provides, the simulation provides us with a couple of pointers here as to what to look out for. You know, there might be a document via Teams that's distracting. And there's something here that's fairly generic, lack of sender details. So in a page, we're giving people some tips as to how to improve their awareness. And there's also a link here to go to training that we can monitor through the attack simulation to see are people using the training, how many people clicked on that link, and not for the purpose of shaming those people, but for the benefit of learning so that we can improve people's awareness and reduce the risk of that impacting our organization. I won't wait for that to load because we need to move on. One of the next components is around advanced threat protection, and we talked a little bit about that. And I wanted to show you one of the things we talked about there, the automated investigation components that I think probably Kenny and Mike both touched on. And the example I've got here is through the Defender for Endpoint product running on Windows 10. I've run basically an example PowerShell script, which is a fileless attack on a machine. And we'll see, I'll just click on that, see what took place as part of that attack. What it did, I ran a PowerShell script that went and ran something in memory, launched a Trojan, and also launched a process, a benign process. In this case, it wasn't a real attack. If we look at the evidence, and this particular attack was automatically remediated, it was detected, automatically remediated. Before I did that, I also ran a backdoor executable that was also detected as part of this, or within that same period of time. So we can see the PowerShell command ran. We can dig a little bit deeper on there. It spawned a malicious process. In this case, the malicious process wasn't really malicious, it was Notepad, but that was remediated automatically. It also created a Trojan and then ran a scheduled task to continue to run that Trojan. And both of those attacks were automatically remediated. And the whole purpose here is to identify for me to be able to review what happened on a machine. I can see that the attack's been remediated. Am I happy with that level of remediation? Do I need to investigate any further? And we get a complete log of everything that happened. If I do need to investigate further, we can see all of the entities that were involved, all of the files, processes, services, etc. The persistence method used or looked for to see if that attack remained, and what we did to make sure that the machine was clean. And at the end of the day, if I'm happy with that process and with the state of that machine, or do I want to block that machine, and then do we need to reimage that, give the person who was affected another computer to work on? But certainly the automation is an incredibly critical component of that. We talked about zero trust principles, and just very quickly, I want to give you kind of like a demo of what that looks like. So we know that Adele over here in Australia logged into her email successfully. We're going to jump across to that US machine, and we know it's the US because it's nighttime and there's a map of the US. But on this computer, I just want to show that this person is able to log into, this is Adele's twin sister Adele, also logging into SharePoint in the US. And basically, we've got a policy within the organization that says we're happy with computers that are non-compliant. If you remember before, we were looking at that compliance state. This computer is not compliant, but we're okay for people in this organization to look at SharePoint. However, we're not happy with them looking at email. If people are, then we're not going to let them gain access to email. So what we've done is we've evaluated that authentication against the policies that we have in place for the same user. One computer was compliant, the other one is not compliant. and we're letting that person know that their computer needs to be compliant or compliant with the organization's policies before they can go ahead and access that resource. So just a real world example of kind of what that looks like. And finally, I just wanted to touch very quickly on, let me find the right page. Is on continuous security improvement. And continuous security improvement, when we talk about that, the security landscape kind of changes. There are new threats, our devices change, we see new things occurring. And once we've done a bunch of improvements in our environment and tick those boxes, we're not done, because there will be new threats and new weaknesses and changes. So the secure score is meant to give us an idea of, and it does give us an idea, a good idea of what's happening across our identities, devices, and apps, and a way to improve. What are the actions that we can do to improve the security of our environment, and continuing to do that as our environment changes and as the security landscape and threats change as well. Very quickly, I wanted to also touch on vulnerability management. So, and looking at software inventory, the importance of knowing that the applications that we have in our environment are what state they're in, and not just Microsoft applications. So you can see in this screen, we're looking at Firefox and 7-zip as well. They have known weaknesses. Fortunately for me, in this environment, they don't have public exploits available. However, I can see that IE and Windows 10 do, and I probably want to address those as a priority. And so we can also look at that from an endpoint perspective around recommendations as to what I should do on my endpoints. That's taking a bit of time to load, but there we go. We can see I need to update Mozilla Firefox, update 7-zip to that particular version to avoid those known weaknesses, and update Windows 10 is high at the priority list because that's got the biggest impact in my organization. So it helps give us direction about that as well. The final thing I wanted to touch on was around threat analytics, which is important when we're talking about, and I think Kenny mentioned the recent zero-day exploit for Exchange. And while this is not targeting endpoints, I just wanted to give you an example of why that's important. So these high-profile attacks that we might see, we can drill down on and look at the relevance of that. I've got all of this information at my fingertips as to what that attack was about, and then how relevant that is to my environment. Were there any impacted assets? What is the patching status of my vulnerable devices? What is the overall security configuration status? So I can see very quickly as to how that high profile threat affects my organization. So that's a very quick demo of our 6 key areas of the Limitless security offering where we can improve security in your organization. So thank you very much for your attention and your time, and the demo gods were smiling, I think. Everything went well, and over to you, Helen.
Thanks for that, Danny. So just to finish up today, we just are opening the floor to anyone who has a particular question around anything that we've spoken about today, whether it be for Kenny, Mike, or Danny. And the first, well, we've actually got one already in the chat box. I'm just going to read it out loud for everyone. So we've got a question that asks, does Jasco provide a security audit and workshops related to Microsoft security?
I'll answer that really quickly. The answer is yes. When we're talking an audit, we generally like to have a bit of a sit down and understand what you need out of that audit first. So we don't have a standard, this is what we're going to hit. Also, from an audit perspective, we do not provide penetration tests at this point. So it may be something we offer in the future, but for now, we actually have a partner which we would introduce you to.
Great.
Just on the topics of workshops related to Microsoft security, yes, we do offer workshops focused around security for most of what you've seen today.
There may actually be a few who on there who have been through that workshop experience with us.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Helen, I was cutting you off there.
No, I just wanted to say, if you are interested for any of our workshops, any information, for those of you who have an account manager, feel free to reach out to them. Otherwise, I'll also be sending a recording of this video at the end. So if you want to reply to my email and say that you're interested or would like to learn more, then I could definitely pass on the right information to you.
Sure. please send any questions. We don't always have Kenny here available. We don't always have Danny here available either. He's got a wealth of knowledge. If chat's not your favourite way to go, feel free to bring yourself off mute. Helen, can they do that now, or have you still got them locked down?
I can. I don't know if there's how I would unmute all. Let me have a look.
That's right. Lockie, do you want to actually? Do we have someone who can try to bring?
I've given access now. Sorry, I've given access now, so everyone can unmute as they please. Okay, we've got another question in the chat. So the question is, just as it's loading, from Ray, can you recommend the best forums or alerts to subscribe to keep on top of the current threats or vulnerabilities? Would that be a Microsoft one that maybe Kenny or aware of that they can subscribe to? We don't have anything at Jasco.
Yes, no, absolutely, Helen. So we actually have lots of such feeds, or what's called TI feeds, threat intelligence feeds. I'm just trying to think. If we're actually looking, if you're actually specifically looking for a generalized TI feed, if you just do a very quick Google search for it or Bing search for it, you'll absolutely find it on the Microsoft website. We also have TI feeds for specific things. So, for example, if you just wanted to see the indicators of compromise for Exchange, so the recent zero-day vulnerabilities in Exchange, then there's a specific observed indicators of compromise feed available for that as well. And typically, our feeds are actually available in both JSON and CSV. So if you just do a quick search for Microsoft Threat Intelligence feeds, you should be able to find it.
Sure.
Great, thanks, Kenny. Sorry.
The other thing I was going to say, through the portal, and Danny, you'll be able to tell me which tab to click here. I always forget, but there is one of the pages which does give industry threats. So
that would be the threat analytics capability. Yes,
yep.
in the security.
That's say threat analytics, which gives you the common vulnerability and exploits listed there.
Yep.
And we often recommend that people look at vendors. Most vendors do provide threat information notifications via email or other methods, RSS feeds. So people like VMware, other vendors, IBM, other hardware and software vendors will provide their own security feeds and alert you when there are threats or vulnerabilities available for their products. So we often recommend people to subscribe to those as well.
Perfect.
Thanks, Dan.
There's a question in there from Vincent. So with Exchange Online Protection, do we require third-party security applications? So the answer to that is generally quite personal. When you're talking about third-party security applications, I think you're talking about things like MailGuard. So although, Exchange Online Protection is very good, and I'd say about 40% of what it does is what MailGuard does, being largely around things like the IP and reputation-based blocking. What we find, once again, it's personal. Some of our clients prefer to have that multi-layer approach. So when it comes in, your MX records will point to MailGuard. MailGuard will do its filtering. If MailGuard is not able to filter something or doesn't catch something, it will then go through to Exchange Online Protection. But it is, I don't have statistics on what percentage of each platform will catch what data. What I will say is Exchange Online Protection also adds a few extra features. So once it does fail a reputation-based check, it will then look at attachments. It will do the sandboxing. And what else have we got? There's something else that's completely slipped my mind. So you can't turn off Exchange Online Protection, but even if you could, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
Probably also important to, sorry, you go, Kenny.
No, sorry, I was just going to very quickly add that when you think about Exchange Online Protection, please think of it as foundational security for your email platform. On top of that, there's the question about zero-day vulnerabilities. There's the question about zero-day attacks, right? So these are things, whether they are malware signatures or they are links that point to malicious locations, which are in the true sense of the word zero-day, in the sense that they're actually not very well known in the industry. So that's where you actually that's where there's the room for advanced email security. So at Microsoft, we have Microsoft Defender for Office 365, or Office 365 ATP as it was called in the past, which will basically give you that sandbox thing that Michael was talking about. So it's going to give you the safe attachments, as it's called. So it's going to take the attachments, it's going to put it in a virtualized environment, it's going to detonate it and see whether there's something malicious at runtime in it. There's the safe links capability, which is basically going to evaluate in real time the maliciousness of destinations of URLs, yeah. And then there's a whole raft of other things around spoofing and so on and so forth that Microsoft Defender for Office 365 also provides. Now, that said, you do have third-party solutions as well, for example, MailGuard and some of the others, which will provide those capabilities. But just to your question, when you think about Exchange Online Protection, please think of it as foundational security for your email security platform or your email platform. And then Defender for Office 365 and some of these other third-party solutions are essentially advanced security, where they're actually going to give you protection against zero-day attacks. Is that a fair description, Michael and team?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Definitely. Yep. And the only thing I'd add is when I talk to a lot of people about particularly email security, there's a defense in depth strategy there. Yes. So talking about even if you have a third party on top of Exchange Online Protection, on top of the advanced Microsoft Defender for Office 365, you've got multiple layers to increase your capability.
Yeah.
Great, and thanks for that. And the last question that we've got in the chat at the moment is M365 E3 license good enough to have all of these security features integrated?
So if the answer to that is no. Now, the E3 SKU does have security. It does not. So, for example, the email security, you will get Exchange Online Protection. You won't get Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So generally not. And preempting where you're heading with that is the cost. That's generally a conversation we have around looking at other systems that might be in place. So we got cost of an attack. We've touched on that a bit already. Weighing that up as opposed to a per user license cost, the uplift on E3 to E5, but also we've got a handful of customers that have previously had third-party systems in place that do a lot of what we've talked about, just not through Microsoft. So when we did a bit of a cost analysis there, moving them to an E5 actually may save them a lot of money. So what I'd suggest, please feel free to reach out to us. We can have that conversation. We can understand what you've got at the moment and make that assessment.
Thanks, Mike. All right, guys, any other last questions before we close the session? Keep in mind, obviously, you will have an opportunity if you want to post the event, ask any questions. Feel free to give us a call or email, but for the sake of being in the session, having your question answered now, this would be a great opportunity. Okay. All right. While I'm waiting, I'm just going to let you guys know that this, again, is recorded, as I've already mentioned. I'll be sending it to everyone who has signed up to the event for you to pass on to anyone else within the organisation or for you to rewatch if you'd like to go back on anything that we've spoken about today. I'll also be sending out your Uber Eats vouchers out as well today after the meeting. So just keep an eye out for that email. And if there are no more questions, I think we'll just finish up here. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined today. Thank you to Mike and Danny, who were fantastic, and to Kenny, who's already left the session. If you have any questions, as Mike has just also messaged, if you have anything, please email sales@jasco.net.au or feel free to reply to my email and I will be directing you guys to the right person in charge. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thanks very much. I really appreciate your attendance. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.